Hello and welcome to the third module in our series on the United Nations in general. Today we look at the specialized agencies, funds and programs of the United Nations. As I have said to you before, this is a huge organization and it attends to many things. It tries to help solve some of the world's problems. Now, the general body of the United Nations is one thing, but there are affiliated bodies, affiliated organizations, affiliated institutions, and these institutions vary. First among these are what are called the specialized agencies of the United Nations. Specialized because they are independent agencies which have a special agreement with the United Nations in general and therefore work with the United Nations in their specific areas. And these organizations are basically 15 and they work in various fields. They work in fields of money. So for example, you have the IMF and the World Bank. They are both specialized agencies of the United Nations. You have labor. So for example, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, is one. You have agencies that work in food. That would be FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and IFAD, right? There are others. There are those that deals with science and culture. For example, UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. There are those that deals with development, such as UNIDO, okay? And there are those that deals with telecommunications, weather, and things like that. So for example, you have the WMO, which is the World Meteorological Organization. The point is that these 15 agencies attend to 15 specific areas of human life, of human development, the world over. They are global organization. UNESCO is a global organization. The ILO is a global organization, FAO is a global organization, and they have signed special agreements with the United Nations, and so are United Nations specialized agencies. As a matter of fact, some of these agencies were in establishment, they were in existence, before the United Nations. So for example, the ILO, it was in existence before the United Nations itself. So these are the specialized agencies, and as I said, there are 15 of them. Outside of that, you have what are called the United Nations funds and programs. Now these, if you recall, in an earlier lecture, I said the United Nations was formed in 1945. This is more than 70 years ago. The world has moved on, life has moved on, right? We have evolved some more in terms of our social and economic development. And so some challenges has fallen off. For example, the challenge of dealing with colonialism has fallen off, and some new challenges have arrived. And so to respond to these, there are certain new programs and funds which are under the auspices of the United Nations or which work directly with the United Nations. For example, you have UNEP, which is United Nations Environment Program. You have the UNDP, which is United Nations Development Program, right? And you have other funds and programs. So for example, you have the World Population Fund, you have UNICEF, right, which is United Nations Children Fund, and so you have all of these different funds and programs which, again, like the specialized agencies, have a task or a responsibility to deal with specific issues. However, the difference between these organizations or these programs and funds, because that is what they are called, programs and funds. The difference is they don't have a specialized agreement as UNESCO would have or as ILO would have with the United Nations, but they're funds and programs which actually fall in one way or the other directly under the United Nations. Now there are other bodies, there are bodies which have to deal with other specific issues and challenges. As you would know, for example, a few years ago, 2 decades or so, 3 decades ago, we had the global serious problem of AIDS and people were dying. This was a world problem, a global problem, and we had to deal with that. And so you had a body set up which is called UNAIDS, right? As you know, there's the issue of trade. Trade is very important for economic development around the world. Countries trade with each other. So you have UNCTAD, the United Nations Trade and Development Body. You have, for example, the refugee crisis, as you know. Every day we hear about this. Sometimes there are even tragic situations with refugees. And so you have the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and so on and so forth. And of course, we know the gender issues and the challenges of women's rights and so on. So you have a special body called the UN Women, which deal with women issues around the world. The point is this, that these are bodies which deal with global issues that concern each and every one of us. They are also related organizations to the United Nations. Most of these are bodies which fall in one way or the other under the executive committee, the executive board of the United Nations in one way or the other. Such bodies are, for example, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and also UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, these are bodies which have a direct relation to the United Nations and the executive board of the United Nations in one way or the other help to sort of manage or govern how these bodies operate. And as you might know, for example, the executive secretary of these bodies are appointed directly by the Secretary General of the United Nations. So what we do have then, let's recap. In essence, there are many, many organizations which are affiliated or related to the United Nations. But we can break these down into 4 broad categories. The specialized agencies, which are 15, the fund and programs, which are about 6. Then we have the related bodies, which are about 7. And of course, we have other bodies, generally speaking, which are about 9. So in all, we have quite a few, more than 20, more than 25, more than 30 bodies, which are directly related to the United Nations, whether they are specialized agencies, they are funds and programs, special bodies, or other bodies, as we would say. And this is all important because without this, it is impossible to run such a huge organization. Without this, it is impossible to tackle all of these global problems, be they AIDS, be they problems of gender, be they problems of trade, be they problems of other diseases, be they problems of the weather and climate change, or be they problems of the environment in general. Without these other bodies, we could not cover all of these global issues. So in a nutshell, this is Module 3. I advise you, again, to read the additional reading materials we provide, and we are open for any questions or any issues you may have, any challenges you may have. We are willing to help you deal with these. My name is Richard Byron Cox.